Marvin Bee. I've had the great pleasure of knowing Marvin for a few years now. He started as a technician. Didn't really like tech. He was an athlete in high school and did junior achievement. I don't know how many of you know junior achievement, but it's a great program. I've heard of it, but was unfamiliar with it. He helped. He was in it. He helped mentor some there. And in college, he was playing sports and found his roommate was into the computer club and kind of gravitated towards tech and eventually got a job and moved up to head. And he was selling white boxes for a while, which are these kind of Frankenstein computers we did back in the day, and eventually started his own tech firm business, MB Solutions, which he still holds now. Over 20 years he's been doing it. I'm a former managed service provider myself. I love the tech industry. I love small to medium businesses. I love discussing that. But Marvin has a big twist. He's been doing that for a long time, but he is also a podcaster, perhaps the largest in our space. Uncle Marv's podcast has been around for a long time, over 500 episodes. Everybody knows him. He's really great, got a great disposition, very friendly, very, very, very personable, and never hear a bad thing about Marv. And people love doing his podcast. So it was a great conversation with Marv from one podcaster to another, and with a great tech background for both of us. But Marvin B, I continue to look forward to our developing friendship. Thanks so much for listening. Hi, I'm Joey Pinz, and here's my 45-second introduction. After starting my business in the 90s, I started developing poor habits of eating in my diet because of working way too much. Before you know it, I found myself 340 pounds. The doctor told me if I don't lose the weight, I'm not going to see my daughter graduate. Took the next 7 months, lost 130 pounds. People think there's some secret. Ask me, how'd you lose that weight? Like there's some secret. There is no secret. How'd I lose the weight? Just one word: discipline. I've had other successes in life, and I attribute them all to discipline. Now, I'm not the king of discipline, but I believe that it can help all of us. Friends, colleagues convinced me to start a podcast. The podcast mission: how do we better ourselves and society? I talk to interesting people in health, fitness, sport, wellness, business, technology, science, art, and culture. And I eventually ask them how discipline plays a role in their life. Podcast vision: growth through learning from others. Marvin, I'm very, very excited to talk to you. I see you all the time, but I don't feel like I know you that well. What is it about junior achievement that you like so much? I see you're heavily involved.
So Junior Achievement is an organization that I got involved with in school. And of course, they trick you by saying that, oh, you get to make money. But that what they don't tell you is, yeah, you make 25 cents an hour
Oh, boy.
doing this stuff. And you made $1.50 an hour if you were president. So I said, well, obviously, I want to be president. But Junior Achievement turned out, for those that don't know what it is, it's an organization that teaches kids about business. And you literally form an organization, you create and sell stock, you create and sell a product, and you vote on people to become president, vice president, marketing, accounting, all of that stuff. And you literally run a business for 15 weeks.
Wow.
And you have advisors, which are usually local businessmen, but you as the student are literally running the business. So Junior Achievement, when I look back on it, some of the best things you learn, without being actually in school, because it was an after school product and taught me how to run a business.
So you did this exercise for 15 weeks?
So yeah, we did it. And I did it 2 years as a student, both my junior and senior year. And then we were company of the year. My second year, I was president of the year, and I got to go to the national conference.
Very cool. And so what was your business?
So I forget what the first one is, but the second one, we made what we called high-tech clocks. We basically found clear plastic resin, shaped them, and, purchased the quartz clock parts, drilled our holes in them, and made physical clocks that we sold to people for like $15 or something like that.
Wow. And you came up with the idea, and you hired a team, you sold stock. You made real money at the end, and you were able to keep it. Did you pay your stockholders?
Yep, we kept it. We paid out a dividend at the end.
Huh,
Yeah, it was the whole shebang.
that's really cool. And so, are you involved with it now?
So I'm not as involved with it now. In fact, I haven't done anything for a couple of years with the local office. They've changed the program so much. It is now an in-school program. It's more focused on curriculum,
Ah,
and not that there's anything wrong with that, but that just wasn't my junior achievement.
hmm,
So I still stay in touch with a lot of the people that I met at Junior Achievement. We still organize and do stuff. If the local office called me and needed me for something, I would help.
hmm.
Um, but the Junior Achievement that I know, it's almost gone. There's a few places that still do that company program, but most of it is the in-school curriculum.
Hmm. Very interesting. I've had friends that did it, and I remember, yeah, when I was younger, going to the junior achievement, but I never really understood what it was. It would have really helped. I should have gotten involved. Now that in retrospect.
Well, it was one of those geeky things that
Hmm.
if you were outside of it, you didn't know about it.
Right.
And even back then, it really wasn't, I'm not gonna say popular, it was one of those things, like I said, it was after hours,
Hmm.
so, it wasn't sports,
Right.
it wasn't cheerleading, it wasn't one of the highly promoted clubs from the school, the Spanish club, the science club, all of that stuff, and I even forget how I heard about it, but it was one of the things I did a ton of stuff. I was probably, um at the time, I was probably in the most clubs than anyone had ever been a part of back
Wow.
in those days. I was, a science club. Uh, I did the Spanish club.
Hmm.
I was on the debate team. I was in student government. I played football, basketball, track, and
My
the Youth for
goodness.
Christ club, even.
Wow.
I did it all.
That's very busy. So you had a great knack for technology. You found yourself at a tech support place, I think I understand, and you rose to head technician, but then you eventually started MB Systems. Is that a good portrayal of what happened?
Well, I wouldn't say I had a knack for tech. In
Mm.
fact, I didn't want to be a tech.
Wow.
I was a jock. I'm like, I don't want to be one of those nerds. But yes, I got to college, and I think it was my second year. My roommate was head of the computer club at the school, and they got to fix a lot of the computers around the campus and stuff. Now, it wasn't, a huge computer operation, but it was big enough. And he invited me to help tutor because he said that, look, you're great with people. This would be awesome. You could, make some money. And then, of course, he would bring home all the equipment
Mm.
and it'd be sitting all over our dorm room floor. And I was mechanical enough to help him be able to build and repair. And that's what happened. So, I went through college and grad school just tinkering around with it. When I came back to Florida, and even while I was working part time, I would always take used computers, rebuild them. And it got to the point where one summer I literally was, rebuilding a computer every weekend, taking it to the local computer store, selling it to him.
Wow.
Normally, when you bring a used computer into the store, they would have to send it back. It would have to be, checked out, rebuilt. He would take my computer builds and literally set it on the showroom floor as I'm walking out the door.
Wow.
And that's how I got into tech because he said, "Look, you build computers better than my guys. When are you going to come work for me?"
Hmm.
And I said, "Well, can you afford me?" And at the time, he said, "No." And so I said, "Well, match my salary and I'll come back." And it was probably, I don't know, 3, 4 months later, he called back and said, "Okay, I'm ready for you."
Wow. And this is the time during white boxes, right? Before Dell
Yes.
got involved, right?
Oh,
So
yes.
we're buying motherboards. I was doing the same. I was buying motherboards and boxes and CPUs and assembling everything together. It's
Yep.
like PC DOS or something. It was less
Yeah,
expensive
PC
than
DOS, you were setting the IRQs for the COM
yes.
ports.
Right.
I mean, yeah.
Wow. And then that was really hot for a while, and then eventually just Dell wiped all that away, didn't they? With the
Well,
website and
the first one was Gateway.
oh, Gateway too. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Gateway with the cows on everything, right?
Yep.
The cows were, and they eventually got swallowed up by Compaq. Who bought Gateway
Um, I think so.
or PC Micro? Somebody bought.
No, it wasn't PC Micro, but it was probably HP.
Yeah,
Well, of course, HP bought Compaq, so it
right.
probably
Eventually.
Compaq bought Gateway.
But those were fun times because yeah, we would get parts and we'd go to computer shows and we'd buy the parts and put them together. Uh, but you could just sense that there was a road to the end of that, right? It didn't seem that was going to be lasting. I guess that's easy to say in retrospect.
Well, it's funny because at the time, we thought that it would go on forever because
Mm,
the organizations, of course, were selling at a premium price, and everybody thought that the world would move to this model where, any motherboard could go into a case. People didn't want proprietary systems. Well, turns out that when the big boys decided, you know what, we're going to make them cheaper than it costs you to build that white
right,
box,
right.
that's what killed us.
Yes, that's what killed it.
You know,
Price was all about price.
because
Yeah.
when I started my company, I was selling my white boxes to my clients, even in business,
Mm,
and I could tell them, look, it's going to be the same system, even though it wasn't, because sometimes you couldn't get the motherboards again, but the box itself stayed the same.
mm,
So they liked that everything was the same.
uniform.
But what got me, of course, was it was cheaper to just simply buy a pre-made box than it was for me to build it, time wise and money wise.
Yeah, because we were making 25 points on those white boxes. It was nice. But then all of a sudden, yeah, Dell, you can actually choose the amount of RAM and choose the amount of hard drive space. And it came out to less than I could possibly make it for. And yeah, that was the beginning of the end, right
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
website. Yeah.
just kind of like Amazon is now.
Yeah, very much so. So you're at this place making these white boxes. And when does MB Systems, we'll call it an MSP now, but your IT support company start?
Yeah, so it was so early in 1997. My boss at the time had an opportunity to get a second store, and that store would have been across the street from the University of Miami.
Mm.
And those of us that were working in the tech shop and stuff, we thought that would be fantastic
Hmm.
because a steady stream of people coming in every semester, you knew that you would have people that they needed computers, they'd need them worked on. I actually had talked to him because I was at that point in time, I don't want to say his second in command, but I was going to networking meetings with him. I was promoting the business, and I was like, "Look, we got kids coming in every year. We can hire from within." And he didn't want to do it. At the same time, we had tons of people coming into the store and begging us to come on site,
Wow.
whether it be their home or their business.
Mm.
He wouldn't do that. So I started doing it myself, and he allowed us to do it after hours as long as we bought our stuff from him.
Hmm.
And at some point later that summer, I'm like, you know what? Dude's charging me way too much.
Mm.
So I started then researching on my own, and I found some, online places, some local places where I could buy my parts from. And, I could mark them up and make more money myself. He found out about it and, of course, didn't like it. And that kind of started the end. And I remember we were driving back from one of the networking meetings, and I said, I think I'd like to consider doing, this on-site business. And I said, obviously we wanted to do it with you, but you don't want to do it. So I may go and start that on my own. And he literally looked at me and said, not a chance. You won't make it a year.
Hmm.
And I said, okay. So that next day I had my resignation into him, and I had my business started the next week,
And that was 20 years ago.
1997.
Where's he now? You ever see him?
Actually, I have seen him. He is long since been out of the business. He sold it. He had moved out of the county. He's still in Florida, but he now has partnered with his wife, and they do real estate.
Hmm. Very, very, very popular doing real estate here in the state of
Yeah, well, his
Florida.
wife had always done real estate
I
and
see.
very successful at it. And I mean, he was kind of getting older. He saw the writing on the wall with, selling, new and used computers, not being able to make the money building them new. he had made his living off of the refurbished market. He literally, I don't know if you remember the big Computer Shopper magazines.
Yeah, I do. I loved them.
And in the back, there was these whole things where you could buy,
Oh, yeah.
trailers of computers and stuff. That was
Yes.
his specialty. He would, he'd buy a trailer for like $1,000. And of course, all the computers and stuff in there, we could turn around and sell it for, 5 to 10 grand,
Hmm.
because the good stuff we would put on the showroom floor, and the other stuff we would part it out, and we would do a flea market every Saturday
Wow.
and just sell hard drives, motherboards, you know, US robotics modems and stuff as is. And
Smart.
that he made his killing there. So at some point, I had already gone, but I think he realized that that market wasn't going to sustain itself as an independent computer store. He was going to have to change his model. But I think he was, I don't remember what his age was, but he was older. He was just like, it's time.
I see. 20 years. So 97, you start the MB Solutions,
MB Systems.
MB Systems, and so you're going on site. You're doing IT support. When do you make, or do you make the change to flat rate versus time and material?
So I actually made a change very early because some of my first clients were law firms,
Mm,
and they understood the concept of retainer.
right.
So I got to sell them an average number of hours for a monthly fee. I didn't call it a flat fee or anything like that. It was just a retainer. And I think my very first retainer was like $600 for 10 hours a month.
Hmm.
I would show up one day a week and be there for a couple of hours and do whatever needed to be done. And if anything extra needed to be done, then it would be billable anytime we installed a new computer or it was a special project and stuff. So that started way back when. But back then, I still tried to track the number of hours to the retainer
See.
so that they would, think, well, if I'm, supposed to get 10 hours, I want to get my 10 hours.
Hmm.
And it took me a long time. It was probably not until 2014 that I stopped tracking those hours that closely.
At that point, you started charging per person, per device.
Yeah, it was still kind of a combination. So I've always been a little bit of a hybrid model where it was still tied to, at that point, it was tied to endpoints, but it was endpoints plus hours.
Hmm.
And then
Hmm.
2019 is when I moved to my current model, which it's changed in terms of the phrasing, but I charge per endpoint and per user account.
Hmm. So a user can have could have 10 endpoints, could have cell phone, a couple of PCs, a
Well,
laptop.
because we don't put those on their network, so those
Ah,
are always VLAN on a guest network, so those don't count. But I
I
would
see.
do it based on um, number of Active Directory accounts.
I see.
Then they would also be billed if we were selling, their email. All their email accounts would be billed, but the Active Directory accounts, so even like the administrator account is
Mm,
billable. The
mm,
SQL administrator account, billable,
hmm.
because it's got to be protected. And then I also did that because most of my law firms would do some sort of remote terminal server, and I'd have to bill for the server, but then there could be, 20, 30 people on that terminal server. So I had a server charge and then a per user charge.
Hmm.
And
So
then things like printers and stuff like that they would be charged like a little, like, I don't know, 5, $10 a month. It was kind of ridiculous to do that.
mm. And when I talk to MSPs, Marv, three things keep them up at night: security, they're worried about getting hacked; two, human capital, how they're going to replace their big techs if they leave and get new technicians; and then third is just general growth. They're not good at sales and marketing. PE has put so much money in; they want to grow. Do those three items ring true with you?
Well, they probably should, but they don't. I've been very comfortable in where we've been for a long time. Uh, the closest we have gotten is the year, was it 2022, when we lost 2 clients because they got acquired.
Mm.
And then we just actually got rid of another third recently just because they weren't a good fit. So this is the first time that even though we're comfortable, like the doors aren't going to shut anytime soon because of where I'm at, but that comfort level of the number of endpoints and the number of clients and stuff, uh, we're at a point where, hey, let's get that back up.
Hmm.
And because we were at a point a little while ago where we were considering hiring a full-time tech. So just to give you a little more background, I did have full-time techs back as late as 2012. And I had 2 full-time techs, and I got frustrated because even back then, we had not yet converted to remote support.
Mm.
So if they weren't on site doing something, they were at the office, and if I didn't have a machine for them to build or repair, they're sitting on the computers playing games and doing whatever, and that
Mm.
frustrated the living heck out of me. So once I figured, I found, I believe it was Go to Assist,
Oh yeah.
and once I found that, and I'm like, "You know what? You can go." I mean, and it probably wasn't the best way to do that, but at that point, um, that's when I kind of scaled back and said, "Okay, I can do so much more remote, and when I need to go on site, I can." And then I just found some subcontractors, some local friends and buddies
Hmm.
that, if I needed help, I would call them. I could, call in 3 or 4 techs to help me do a computer move or a network upgrade, and that's how that went. So, in terms of growth, I've never been big on growth. It's more about profitability. You know, it's about being comfortable where I am. So, as long as the bills are paid and I'm growing each year, that's good. I never set my sights too high where I wanted to be, $10 million by, such and such a date. Security probably is up there, but it's more, I don't know if it's because most of my clients, we are comfortable with the stack. So we know that they are protected, and it's just obviously making sure the users don't do something stupid.
Mm.
Um, that's obviously something that's being helped with some of the guidelines that are being given. A lot of my law firms get told by their clients what security requirements they need to have in place.
Mm.
So I don't have to fight a lot of the battles that some people have to fight, by convincing them to have MFA or convincing them, to close, 3389, that sort of stuff. So I'm kind of helped in that regard. And what was the third thing? So growth, security,
And human capital,
human
replacing
capital.
techs, getting new, getting new.
Yeah, and again, because I don't, have anybody that's full time, it's, myself and my wife that are full time, and the
Mm.
rest are subcontractors. Um, and they've been with me forever. I mean, these
Mm.
subcontractors have been with me 20 plus years.
Wow.
So at some point, yeah, I probably would need to think about that because, one of us is going to retire at some point.
Mm. Have you ever been part of a peer group?
Yes,
You still are?
I am.
Which one?
So we created a private peer group
Oh,
about
great.
just over 2 years ago. I had been part of one in ASCII, and I had been part of another one through another group. But 3 years ago, when I got to a point where I was going to consider making some changes in the business, I wanted to do some stuff. I reached out to a friend and we talked about it. And through, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 months of sitting down and chatting, we decided, you know what? Let's make ourselves a group. And we just made a private peer group.
Hmm.
We don't have any formal guidelines or anything, but we meet every other week
Wow.
and we talk about whatever we need to about the business. That's kind of how I've always been. Even when I started, there was a group of us. even though we called ourselves the Geek Squad, it was kind of stupid back in,
Huh.
2000. But it was 5 local techs and consultants where we would meet. I think back then we were just meeting once a month, even, but we were all, chatting with each other, helping each other out. We weren't afraid of stealing each other's clients or anything like that. So that's kind of how I've always worked, that you just find the right people to mix with, and it works.
And you're all in the same geography.
So the peer group now, no, we're all over the country
I see. And you meet every other week.
every
Wow.
other week. Yeah.
Do you ever meet face to face?
Not as a group. We just talked about having our first one. And of course, I invited them here because it's warm.
Yeah. Yeah. I assume they're in a non-warm place.
Yeah,
Yeah.
most of them are, some of them are not necessarily the Great White North, but they're up there.
Wow. So when did podcasting? So you have 3 podcasts, IT business podcast, unfamous, unhealthy podcast. When did they enter into your view?
So the IT Business Podcast was the first. It started out as a show called Podnuts Pro. And that was an extension of another podcast called Podnuts, the computer repair show. And that's where I got introduced to podcasting. And it was like 2013, 2014. And it was just me. I was happened to be looking for some help on a product. And I came across this thing called a podcast. And I'm like, well, that sounds stupid. But I kept coming back to some of these groups, that would refer to the podcast. And they were people talking about the same things that, I was dealing with. And I listened to them. And the Podnuts Pro was a show that had been around, but had kind of pod faded, and people wanted it back. And that was focused on the business side of tech. The computer repair podcast was more for residential techs, computer repair shops, and they didn't really focus on the business side. So I brought back the original host of the Podnuts Pro show, and we did that for several years. He left the show, and it was just me, and I decided to rebrand it into the IT Business Podcast.
And that was when?
I did that in 21.
Wow. Because I think you're the first, certainly in our industry. I mean, I've been listening to you for a while, and your style is just very conversational, very kind of matter of fact. What do you do? How can we help? What's the relative value to the customers? It's a nice, even, well mannered podcast. It's very informative.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. And where did you get your style from?
Don't know.
Just your personality.
That's just me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's something where, when you watch shows on television or you hear radio shows or talk shows and stuff, they're so formal
Yeah.
and they're so cut and dry. And I didn't want my show to be that. I wanted it to be just 2 people chatting. And of course, you have to ask questions. So it's finding a way to ask the question where it doesn't come across as interview stylish,
Mm.
where I just ask and you answer. I want it to be a back and forth, and, making it to where people felt comfortable. I was trying to figure out what's the best way to do that. And it was just to simply have a conversation.
Hmm. The Unhealthy Podcast. We talked about this briefly once.
Yeah.
Are you still doing it?
So it's on a hiatus, but it will be coming back. And that show, that's the last show I started. And that was something where I thought I needed to hold myself accountable for some health stuff.
Hmm.
Not that I needed to be super healthy, because I mean, I spent most of my life as an athlete.
Right.
So working out, running, playing basketball. And I just got to the point where when I retired from basketball, I said, no more. I don't, 48 years of, going to the gym, running, working out, watching. I'm like, I'm done.
Mm.
I'm going to live life. But after a few years, I got the belly, oh, and it was like, okay, what can I do to make sure that I stay healthy? And I wanted to figure out how to do it without having to go back to the gym.
Mm.
And I said, let me just start finding people to talk about what it is that they did. I didn't want to bring people on, to talk about all the different diets, and I didn't want them to sell stuff and things like that. So that's how it started with, how can I get myself healthy? And then I'll make a podcast around it. And that has now kind of morphed into what else in life is unhealthy,
Mm.
whether it's our relationships, with other people, our relationships with money. And, some of the things that we'll be talking about in the upcoming shows are just even simple things of water. How unhealthy is the water we drink? And a lot of people look at certain types of vitamin water, but yet if you really drill down on what's in them, some of them have preservatives and stuff in the water. Okay, well, that's not how original water was,
Mm-mm.
supposed to be. So we're going to dive into ways to, live healthy and be happy in all areas. So body, mind, spirit.
Hmm. And the Unfamous podcast.
So that has been a personal podcast that started during the year of our COVID. And it was a way for me to reach out to friends. And it started out just, we've got all these people connected on Facebook,
Mm.
but we don't talk. And I said, let me just reach out to family and friends and we'll just have Facebook conversations. And of course, it was during COVID. And in the beginning, it was fantastic. And then, of course, we all got, tired of video. And
Yeah,
so
sure did.
then I started slowing down. And so I've morphed that into that will eventually turn into a full-time show, probably something similar to yours, where, you're talking to people about, leading disciplined lives. I'm going to have it focused on there are people that we meet in life that are interesting to us. They come to us at a certain point in time and they may leave, but for a season of life, those people are in our lives. And I'm going to have conversations based on that. And some of them will be related to my life in particular, some of them will be related to others. And they may be stories of inspiration, or they just me, maybe stories of, information. You know, hey, here's somebody that I think you might want to know. This person wrote a book. This person did
Hmm.
this. So, you know, we tend to focus on, people that are huge and big and famous. Well, there's a lot of important people in our lives that aren't famous,
Mm.
but they're a big part of it. So that's why I named it the Unfamous Podcast.
So we were just at the big IT Nation Connect a couple weeks ago in Orlando, the biggest, MSP industry event of the year. And, you're podcasting for 2 days. I think you had to leave the last day. But how do you manage your time between podcasting and still running the MSP? Did you just go talk to the vendors? Do you still have kind of do you see people in your peer group? I mean, how do you balance the two?
Yeah, we did. Well, I mean, part of it is just you've got to put the boundaries on it.
Mm.
I did have to set aside some time where it's like, look, I can't podcast, from the start of the day every single hour. So, uh, just in life, you've got to put boundaries around what you do, and staying within the boundaries. I mean, it's probably the hardest thing to do when it comes to this, because podcasting is a lot of times you just got to do it when you can.
Mm.
But I don't forget that the business is what pays the bills. The
Mm.
business is what's going to keep the wife happy,
Hmm.
you know, and that sort of stuff. So organization and just, staying in control of everything is big. Automating a lot of the processes so that I don't have to, worry about the time and the struggle. Of course, as you know, podcasting takes time.
Sure does. It sure
And
does. It's fun though.
yeah.
I sold my MSP in 2019. You know that. So I mean, like, is your goal to sell, Marvin? Or are you gonna keep going? What are you gonna?
No, No, because if my goal was to sell, then it would be to, I'd spend all the time growing it, and it'd
Beefing
be
it
all
up,
about
yeah.
the money. And I
Yeah.
don't live my life about the money. My life is about the journey,
Hmm.
which is kind of the way I treat, my business and all the other things that I do in life. That this is me.
Hmm.
And if I found something else that I wanted to do more, then I would look at an exit strategy.
I see.
So for me right now, I just go where it goes. Although in I think it's, what do we say, June 2026 is when we decided, okay, that's a point in time that we probably should sit back and think, okay, where do we want the business to go? And we'll put together either a 5-year or a 10-year plan.
Interesting.
That's what I agreed to with the wife, is that we'll start to put something on it.
Hmm. You're setting a date to plan. It's very, very, very interesting. And do you, on the business side, are you still the technician for a lot of clients, or are you doing the quarterly business reviews? What's your role? What do you like to do most in MB Systems?
Well, I mean, technically I do everything except
Wow.
for, the bills. I mean, the wife does most of that stuff, but yeah, I'm still it. Now, a couple of my clients are co-managed, so there's technicians at those locations. They're desktop tech, so I don't have to do everything. 80% of what I do is remote, but yeah, I still manage that. I still do the reviews with the owners of the business. We don't get tons of tech calls.
Hmm.
It's That's probably the hardest thing to explain to people, and I can't really say exactly why, except that we've put a good stack in,
Hmm.
and my clients have learned to listen. It's
Hmm.
probably the biggest thing. Um, we just don't get those little calls that a lot of people get. We don't get the password resets, which is odd. So it's not as much of a struggle
Hmm.
now. I've been saying that now for the last couple of weeks, and watch my life,
Oh,
just
yeah,
blow up
knock
or
on wood,
something.
yeah. But I'm sure these are you've been around for a long time, you're extremely likable, you're very knowledgeable, you're pleasant. So these are probably clients you've had for a long time, you've got deep relationships with them.
Yes, yes. All of my clients, I can't say all of them, but yeah, a good portion of my clients have been with me for many, many years. My
Mm.
my longest client, we were just talking, yeah, because he actually called this morning. He's the only one that will call because he clicked something wrong in his computer,
Hmm.
and but he's been with me since '98. And
Wow.
he'll be retiring probably at the end of this year or next year. But yeah, they've been with me a long time. My largest client has been with me since '09.
Hmm.
We were just talking with another client that's been with us since '05. And yeah, I usually try to ask them every now and then, hey, listen, I know that other people have reached out to you and say that they'll give you better pricing, better deal and stuff. Why do you stay with me? And they're like, hey, we trust you.
Right.
And that's probably the biggest compliment
Nice.
that I can get from them. And, I have very few problems with them. I mean, my clients, we've got clients. I mean, I just had one that went on vacation. She's gone for 2 weeks, and I was at IT Nation. Um, and she had an issue with QuickBooks, and I called her from the conference, and she's like, I'm sorry to bother you. I mean, it's like, here it is. She's the bookkeeper for a law firm of 150 people, and she's apologizing to me. And I said, it's okay. Tell me what you need. And she said, well, I just got to do this. I just got to write checks. I'm going to be gone for 2 weeks. And she goes, and by the way, you didn't send your invoice. I'd pay it if you send it.
Hmm.
Stuff. She's the type of person that if
That's
she's sitting in her
wonderful.
office and sees our invoice, she'll pay it right away.
Wow.
I have great clients.
But Marvin, in this world of private equity, they've just made so. I'm sure you've been approached before. I mean, what happens? What are those conversations like?
I mean, I get the emails. I just ignore them.
I say, yeah, it's just not where you want to be. So that's the future of MB systems. How about the podcast? What do you see happening? You see more podcasts? You see changing any particular way? How you love doing them, so you're going to keep doing them.
Well, I don't have direct plans for it,
Mm,
and a lot of it has been, "Hey, let's see what we can do."
mm,
I mean, the stuff that we've done in the last few years has been amazing. I mean, to go to all the events as a part of the media, that's something we weren't doing 3 years ago.
yeah, 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 I know,
Um,
we're considered the media.
the live streaming, that again, 3 years ago. Um, so I don't know where
Mm,
that's gonna go. It's interesting because part of what I'm doing is waiting to see what happens with podcasts in the tech sector. So there are some very successful podcasts outside of the channel,
yes.
that are the tech enthusiasts and stuff, but they're also big on the YouTube and, that becomes their life. I'm
Mm,
like, okay, I don't know that I want to go that route.
mm, mm,
And on the other side, there's podcast and vendor shows popping up all the time. Even though they're not direct competitors, they are.
right.
So I think that there's going to be, just like with everything else, just like, we see where the marketplace is going to go with, private equity, where, how's it going to affect MSPs? How is the legislature going to affect us? I'm waiting to see what is it that's out there of other people coming into the podcast space.
Mm,
People like you and the vendors, you guys got a lot more behind you. I was
mm,
trying to think of the right words to
mm,
say it gingerly. Um, but for companies that are vendors, companies that are marketing companies, even large MSPs that are doing podcasts that are trying to, reach not only prospective business people, um, but other techs and stuff. That's all competition, and I have to look at, how much time and resource am I going to put in to compete with that? And I'll just get to a point where, if I have to make a ton of money to do it and it doesn't become fun, then I won't do it.
right. Once it stops being fun, yeah. Why are, steak knives a good 2nd or 3rd place gift?
Well, you know the movie where that comes from, right?
Tell
So,
me.
huh?
Tell me.
Well, it's that famous line, where, that what is it, Alec Baldwin's
Alec
character,
Baldwin, Glengarry Glen Ross.
yeah, and he's making that statement, first place, it's a Cadillac, second place, set of steak knives, third place, you're fired. So last year when we started doing the pitch it thing with Sean Lardo, it was always, first place 70 grand, second place, third, 30 grand, third place, nothing. And I'm like, come on, you got to give the third place prize, something, because even though, there's what, 26, you can't give something to all 26.
Right.
But if you're going to have somebody, I've always thought that if you're going to have somebody hit the podium, they still, get a medal at the
Mm,
Olympics. You still get trophies and stuff. So I thought if they're pitching at IT Nation, at least give them something. So give them a set of steak knives.
mm,
And that's where that came from. And, the first year was just, you know, listen, I need to let listeners know they don't pay me for those steak knives.
right, that's out of your
So,
pocket.
so the
Yeah.
first year was, from the dollar store. This past year, it was not from the dollar store,
Ah,
so it was a step up,
nice.
and I may look for somebody to sponsor the steak knives, and we can
Hmm,
get, because somebody asked me for, they wanted the Ginzu something, and
right.
they wanted the butcher's block that they win. I'm like, okay, that's a lot of money, so we may
Huh.
up the ante next year if I find a sponsor.
Yeah, you let me know next year. I may have some sponsors, that may wanna help with that. It's a really good idea. Marvin, have there been anything in the last month or so, 6 week that you've changed your mind on?
Changed my mind on. So I don't know if I would say change my mind on, but there's been some topics. They've, a lot of these topics have been out there for a while, The concept of MSP versus MSSP.
Mm.
There's been a lot of private conversations about that. Is there really such thing as an MSSP, or is it just a MSP with a focus in security? The idea that states and the U.S. government might start to regulate the MSP industry
Whoa.
at some point in time. One of the things that I've done is I've actually changed my approach when talking to clients about a lot of this, where I'm using the state statutes. Florida just recently, reintroduced the Florida, Privacy Act, or the Information Protection Act. The Florida Bar has their own ransomware guide with their
Hmm.
best practices and stuff. So what I've been doing is using a lot of those to go to my clients and say, look, this is what we need to be looking at. It's not me pushing stuff on you, but if you want to be protected, if you don't want the Florida Bar, coming at you as part of a sanction, you may want to look at these recommendations and let's do them. So, before it was just, we were always told by vendors, you should be selling this without really great reasons except to, be best in class.
Mm.
Well, best in class never rang true to the customer
Hmm.
because they were like, well, what does that mean? So being able to show them something in black and white, forget best in class. Here are the recommendations that are out there for you to protect yourselves against cyber criminalism, cyber attacks, ransomware. And, it's not me saying, hey, let me sell you more stuff. It's let me help you be protected.
Hmm.
So I don't know if that answered your question.
Really interesting. Yeah. Yeah, because I work with some vendors that say we only want to work with MSSPs. I said, okay, tell me what that is. Because
Right.
everybody's got a different answer. I mean, MSP that focuses on security, all MSPs focus on security. They have no choice. If they're going to be protecting their clients, they have to, they have to know and in their stack have to have security services. But it's the ones that focus on it. Maybe they have their own socket, right, or knock, right, their own security operations center or network operating center. So there's lots of different variations there, but it is an interesting debate
It is. And
to
and
hear.
listen, I'm not against that focus on security. I
Mm.
I think that there is to some degree a responsibility that we do need to look at that. The question is, do I need to have a 24/7 SOC for my client?
Right.
That is just simply, like, for instance, most of my law firms, they're not working 24 hours a day. I've got a couple of retail operations, now I may have to worry about weekends and stuff like that, but a lot of my clients, they don't need that. So
Mm.
why should I force that on them?
Interesting.
But at the same time, their servers are up and running all the time. They're emailing all hours and stuff. So there is something to be said for that. I think it's just a matter of perspective.
Mm.
There are some people that are so adamant that you have to have, the latest, you know, EDR, MDR, EVR, XDR, whatever the flavor is, and you've got to have, everything out there in your stack. Um, that's probably going to be something where maybe a blend of the stack is right for this customer as opposed to this customer. Um, but I probably do more with my stack than a lot of other MSPs too. I use, Threat Locker. That's probably if you, had to put a line of demarcation for some MSPs, those that use Threat Locker and those that don't,
Mm.
or those that use a Black Point Cyber or those that don't,
Mm.
those that use a CrowdStrike, those that don't. I mean, there's certain lines that
Sure.
people get to, some that have a sock, some don't.
Mm.
So I think there will be this differentiation of levels of MSP, but
Hmm.
it'll be interesting.
So, Marvin, my story. I was working too hard. I started the MSP in '93, and right around that time, right around '97 or so. So I got myself up to not paying attention to my what I'm eating. You mentioned that. You mentioned like not going to the gym. And all of a sudden, I got a belly.
Yep.
For me, it was much worse. I got myself up to 340 pounds. The doctor says to me, if I don't lose the weight, I'm not going to see my daughter graduate. So it scared me to death, and took the next 6, 7 months, lost 130 pounds, kept it off. And people want the quick answer. You alluded to it before. There's no quick answer. That I always say discipline. That's how I lost it. That's how I keep it off. How does discipline play a role in your life, Marvin B?
So, so discipline, I don't want to say it came easy to me,
Mm.
but my dad was in the Air Force.
Ah.
So there was a lot of regimen in his life that he instilled in us.
Hmm.
And it was you get up and you do the things that you need to do every single day.
Mm.
You don't complain about them, you just do them. And there's a reason because they're going to lead to whatever down the
Hmm.
road. And that was applied to every aspect of our life, whether it was school, whether it was sports, extracurricular activities. Um, he was of the mantras, you don't quit. Everything you start, you finish, which means that you need to learn about it before you decide.
Hmm.
So that's been the way I've, run my life
Hmm.
in everything. So discipline, of course, everybody's got their definition of what discipline is, doing the things you don't want to do,
Right.
or, discipline is how you act when you think people aren't looking,
Hmm.
all those types of things. Um, those all are just stuff I've just always had.
Hmm.
Now I was going to ask you, you've told your story, but I don't know that anybody's ever turned around and asked you, if you did that back then, what is it that keeps you disciplined today?
It's interesting. You mentioned that it doesn't come easy. Your father was in the military and kind of instilled that in your home. I mean, I had this ongoing thesis, Marv, that discipline is a spectrum. And the more I talk, I've kind of narrowed it down to 10 elements. So the great the great thing about that question is there's never a right answer. And I reserve I reserve the right to change my name my position on
Right.
any given topic given new evidence. I asked you what you changed your mind on recently, and my answer now for what discipline means to me could be very different tomorrow or next week or
Right.
yesterday. Same with you. I guess that's the beauty of it. So I've really come to adopt, because when I talk to some people, sometimes I get like sometimes when I talk to musicians, they'll say, "Ah, I can't stand. I'm not disciplined at all. I reject discipline. And I said, well, you play an instrument. You know musical structure. Doesn't that involve? And I'm not trying to talk them out of it, but even some some self discipline is still discipline, and I don't mean I'm not the king of discipline. My goodness, I'm deeply flawed, Marv, and I've got lots of room for improvement. But I really enjoy people's answer and perspective on that question, and it continues to grow and evolve. We'll see what happens. Again, my thesis is that it's 10 elements. I'm going to be releasing a book. I haven't really told many people that, and it's going to be released in the spring of 25. I've got a publisher, and I kind of carry that thesis on. We'll see what happens, but I appreciate the question. What motivates you, Marv?
My motivation is just to simply be as happy as I can
Hmm.
for as long as I can. It's it's like so the reason I was going to ask you, what keeps you disciplined is because I wanted to hear your motivation because you mentioned, the doctor saying if you keep on this path, you won't be able to see your daughter graduate.
Yeah,
Well, I'm assuming she graduated.
she did.
So what's motivating you now? Because if
Well,
that was the motivation,
yeah.
that's no longer there.
Well, see, so my realization in driving home after that conversation was, look, I can abuse myself all I want because it's me, but it's not just me anymore. It's this family, right? I have a child that I am somehow responsible for, that I want to see grow old and be healthy and hopefully make great choices. I have another daughter as well. So I think it's just as strong now as it was then, even though they're in their 20s. I want to be good for them. I want to be the best father I can and help them and help my friends and others. And if I'm unhealthy and can't live, I can't reach that motivation.
Yeah.
So when you say happiness is a motivation, that's wonderful. But how do you measure that? How do you measure success if it's happiness? How do you know? Do you often ask yourself?
So I tell you this, I struggle because I don't use success in the same way that a lot of people do.
I say,
Um, the best way to describe it is, you know, my wife, she'll hate me for saying this, but she won't listen. She had a big old scare in 2020. She actually went into the hospital the week before COVID hit,
oh my.
and she had, some internal ulcers. She had low iron. She had a whole bunch of stuff. And I remember talking with her and, having the conversation that we had had many times before where, you know, your focus needs to be on being healthy for you. And I selfishly wanted you to be healthy for me
Mm,
because I'm like, this is my life. My life is you and me. So I need you to work on yourself so you can be here. Now, the flip side is that is I've got to do the same thing.
hmm,
I've got to work on, not just my health, but my mind, because the flip side of, the physical side is the mental side, because the business and the podcast can take away so much from family life. They both take a lot of time. So that's why I went back to talking about you've got to, put the borders around it and got to have the boundaries and respect those.
mm,
So success for me, when I say it's just to be happy as much as I can for as long as I can, is based on those different areas. I have that level of happiness that I want to have with my wife. I have the level of happiness I want to have with my family. And I have the level of happiness I want to have with the business. I
mm,
don't want it to drive me to the exclusion of everything else.
hmm,
So I'm probably much more content in life than a lot of people are with where things are. I also probably don't get rattled as much because for me, hey, if I lose the business, I can work somewhere else.
mm,
I can do something else. It's not going to define me.
hmm,
So that's kind of where I'm at with that. It's not about, the success of the business, to the point of, you know, I have to measure it by the same markers that everybody else does. You know, is it profitable? I mean, it's got to be profitable. I've got to be able to make money. I've got to be able to pay my bills. Is it sustainable? And those are the two things I look at.
hmm. And having that peer group really holds you accountable for a lot of those things, which helps.
So the peer group, it's funny. We've been at this point where they find it hard to hold me accountable
Ah,
because I don't have the same, KPIs that
hmm,
they do. It's obviously easier for me to hold them accountable, but we're working on that. We're working on me telling them, okay, let me give you something concrete that is measurable. Because I think that's the hard thing, is that a lot of times, happiness isn't measurable in
mm,
some degree. There's different levels of being happy. So, if my business makes $5,000 net, I'm happy.
Mm.
Now I'm not as happy, as I would be if it made, $80,000 net. There's, all of that. That $80,000 net makes the wife a lot more happier. Um, but in terms of the peer group holding me accountable, it is more in the sense of staying within the lanes of what an IT provider is. You know, am I staying true to what we're supposed to be doing with our clients? Am I
Mm.
protecting them? Am I moving them forward? Am I helping them? Those are the types of things that we're helping each other with. Now, it obviously moves into, what are the tools that we're all using, that help us. Um, of course, we're looking at, all the AI stuff now. How is it then we can make our lives, easier with some of the AI tools and putting together our processes, our SOPs, all of that stuff. I'm giving you long answers to these questions, aren't
I
I?
love it. Happiness is a tough one to measure.
It is.
It's so tough because I can't be happy if my daughters aren't happy, right? I can't be happy if my loved ones aren't happy, or if it's it, and then of course there's many degrees, right? You could be a little happy, my Yankees lost the World Series. I was bummed for a while, not anymore. I mean, it's happiness is kind of it's a scale, but it's tough to measure, but it is important though, because when you're happy, your body reacts, you're healthier, it's just generally healthy for you. It's a tough one though.
It is. I'm so I wanted the Yankees to win too,
Yeah.
but I wasn't bummed when they
Right.
well, let's rephrase that. I was bummed, but I don't let it affect me.
Yeah.
I'm a Florida State Seminole.
Of course you are. Yeah.
My team is having the
Yes.
worst
Yes.
year
Tough year.
after what they went through last year.
Yeah.
And, I watch every game, even if they're losing and stuff. And, the wife looks at me, she goes, "How can you do that? Isn't it just driving you nuts?" I'm like, "It's not me. I'm
Right.
not the one that's out there playing."
Yeah.
You know? Am I sad for them? Yeah, but what they do does not affect my life more than I allow it to.
Yeah.
And I do that with everything. That, you know, whatever's going on around me, I don't let it get me too high. I don't let it get me too low. I only want to deal with what affects me directly.
Mm.
And that's what I'll get emotional about.
I have a lot of friends, Marv, that get really stuck on trying to control things they can't control.
Yeah.
And you got to pull away from that, and I've had some tragedy in my life. I know you had a scare with your wife there, and that kind of resets your, resets your priorities. Which really, hell, I've been following the Yankees since I'm a kid, love them a win, but when they lost, that sucks, and maybe grunt a little bit for a day, but then you move on. But, but to have some influence or some participation in friends or colleagues' success, no matter how small, is a wonderful, much more wonderful reward.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, Marv, I love what you're doing. I love how you're balancing the business that I love so much and have known for so long. Even though I'm not an MSP anymore, I still feel like I am. I do some fractional work with MSPs and some vendors, so I'm very much in the community. But the podcast, you're just such a staple there. Everybody knows you. You always do such a great job. Everybody always has great things to say about you. You're extremely likable. You've got great presence, and I really appreciate your time today. Anybody listening, how can they get in touch with you?
So the easiest way for most is probably find me on LinkedIn if you're there. You did mention my all three podcasts. So the easiest way to go find all three of them is to go to unclemarv.com. And that will give you links to all the different shows and whichever one you like, listen to.
UncleMarv.com. And of course, on LinkedIn, you're Marvin Bee, B-E-E.
Yep.
And we'll make sure to put it in the show notes. Marv, thanks so much for your time. Looking forward to seeing you at the next event, and you be well.
All righty, sir. You too. Thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypins.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations.